If you like the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Prologue. What the textbooks don't tell you. The first true tournament, the one school textbooks keep quiet about, but old parchments in monastery libraries whisper of, took place in 1066. That very year, the Norman Duke William the Conqueror was preparing to cross the English Channel and seize England. The army lay encamped on the coast of Normandy. The wind tugged at the banners, horses pawed at the sand with their hooves, and boredom and tension thickened like old blood before a battle. Men who knew only how to fight could not endure idleness. Drunken brawls broke out, quarrels over women, and sometimes outright duels with lethal outcomes. And so, two companies of Norman knights, their own against their own, met in a mock battle. No one wanted to die for real. Each man had already smelled death in previous campaigns. But each craved glory, splendor, and that special respect that only victory brings. Then someone, the chroniclers disagree on whether it was Duke William himself or his marshal, a man named Robert de Beaumont, devised the Lance of Peace. A standard tournament lance, 3 or 4 meters long, but with a deliberately blunted tip. Often the tip was shaped like a crown, not meant to pierce, but to hook, to shove, to unseat a man from the saddle. A blow, a crack, sparks from the shield, the saddle groans, but the body remains whole. And the loser, the one whose shoulder touched the ground or who broke his lance less cleanly, would surrender to the victor his horse, his helmet, or a costly belt. Sometimes simply a purse of coins. Thus war, which until then had known only 2 outcomes, victory or death, was suddenly transformed into sport. A game with rules, stakes, spectators, and glory that does not reek of blood. But the true flourishing came a century later, during the time of the Crusades. The knights who returned from the East brought back to Europe not only silk, spices, and wondrous tales of Saladin's palaces. They brought back a strange, previously unknown longing, a longing for an honest fight without slaughter. For in the East, they had gazed upon true cruelty. Severed heads, mountains of skulls, poisoned wells. They yearned for a clean duel. In 1127, a German chronicler, laboring over a parchment in the scriptorium of Mainz, recorded with a trembling hand, "In France, near the town of Valenciennes, young warriors staged a combat, calling it tournement, a turning. For they turned against one another like millstones." And that word went roaming through the castles, tournament, tournament. Within it, one could hear the pounding of hooves, the spinning wheel of fate, the hoarse cry of a herald, and the grinding clash of metal. Part 1. How the rules were born. Tournament rules were born in blood and laughter, as befits rules written by living people, not officials. First, arrows were banned. Too sneaky, too peasant-like. A knight must look his enemy in the eye. Then, strikes to the back were forbidden, considered dishonorable, unworthy of a Christian warrior. Then, special barriers were introduced. A long wooden partition placed down the middle of the field. Why? To prevent horses charging from opposite sides from colliding chest first. Imagine 2 draft horses weighing half a ton each carrying an armor-clad rider, galloping towards each other head-on. A frontal collision meant death for both animals and riders. The barrier separated them. Each raced along its own lane, while lances crossed over the partition. Thus the classic joust was born, the very tournament we see in movies. The fighting ground was first roped off, then surrounded by wooden shields, and later by permanent stone or oak fences. This gave rise to the word ring, from the Old Germanic hring, circle, enclosure. By the way, for a long time the ring was not round but rectangular, up to 200 meters long and about 40 meters wide. And between bouts, heralds came onto the field. They were not just criers. A herald was a living encyclopedia. He had to know by heart the coats of arms of all noble families of Europe, remember pedigrees back to the 7th generation, and understand heraldic colors and figures. In colorful cloaks embroidered with gold, with a staff in hand, they called out the participants' names. Sir Arthur of Brittany, son of the Earl of Richmond, vassal of the king, and immediately checked if some common brigand or impostor was hiding under false armor. If they found one, lifelong shame. The herald also declared the winner, and his word was law. No one dared to argue. Interestingly, initially all knights who wished could take part in tournaments, poor and rich alike. But by the 13th century, stratification emerged. Rich counts and dukes fielded entire squadrons in expensive Milanese steel armor. Poor shield-bearers, French écuyers, could only afford leather armor and an old helmet. To avoid hard feelings, different categories were devised. Helmet knights, in full armor, and shield knights, light armored. They did not mix. It's like today's weight classes in boxing. Part 2. The Sacred Ritual on the Eve. By the 13th century, the tournament had become a true ritual, rivaling coronations or weddings in its solemnity. Preparations began weeks in advance. Squires scoured chainmail with sand and vinegar to make it gleam in the sun. Horses were shod with special lightweight shoes, not for long marches, but for short, explosive gallops. Saddles were weighted down because a knight had to sit in them as if fused to the seat. A tall saddle with a high back, like a chair, kept him from flying off at the moment of impact. The evening before was the most important part. Weapons were consecrated in a field chapel. The priest sprinkled holy water on lances, swords, maces, and even the spikes on the horseshoes. A prayer was said. Lord, protect the hands of these warriors from a deadly blow, but grant them the strength of an honest victory. This was not merely a ceremony. It was an attempt to reconcile Christian faith, thou shalt not kill, with the warrior's nature, fight. The tournament was a compromise. You shed sweat, but not blood. You break bones, but you do not take a soul. The lady of his heart, if the knight had one, would throw him a sleeve from her gown or an embroidered handkerchief, sometimes even a glove. This gesture meant more than any words. You fight for my honor, and I pray for you. The knight would tie the gift to his helmet, to his shield, or wear it under his armor, close to his heart. He carried that piece of fabric into battle like a banner. There were cases when a lady threw a kerchief from a balcony and 3 knights at once would start fighting for the right to pick it up. This was considered a separate, preliminary bout. Speaking of ladies, women at tournaments sat on special wooden galleries called beauty pavilions. They applauded, shouted, and sometimes fainted when a rider fell from his horse. And very often, it was a lady who awarded the prize. The victor would ride up to the gallery, kneel, as much as armor allowed, and the most beautiful woman of the tournament would present him with a wreath of roses or a gold chain. Woe to anyone who then tried to court another lady. Rumors spread faster than an arrow. But there was a darker side. Some ladies took lovers precisely from among the tournament fighters. Husbands sitting nearby pretended not to notice. Because a knight who fights well in a tournament is an asset, a sin to lose. Thus, tournaments destroyed marriages, yet also cemented alliances. History has preserved the name of Adela of Champagne, who in 1180 at the tournament in Lagny-sur-Marne threw her sleeve not to her husband, but to a strange knight from Burgundy. A year later, she left her family. The scandal resounded throughout France. King Philip II Augustus personally heard the case. But strangely enough, this scandal only increased the popularity of tournaments. Women understood that there they could openly choose their hero. Part 3. The Rules of Victory and Shame. But what actually happened on the field? Two squads would line up at opposite ends of the lists, usually 20 to 30 horsemen on each side. The herald sounded his horn 3 times. Then he cried, "In the name of God and the ladies!" and dropped his baton. That was the signal. The horses leapt forward, first at a walk, then a trot, then a gallop. The ground shook. Lances were set into the shield rests. A split second before impact, each knight chose his target, the enemy's shield, helm, or shoulder. Then came the crash, and the lance splintered into shards. This was considered a thing of beauty. But if the lance failed to break, slipping aside or bouncing off, that was shame. Poor sharpening. A weak strike. The judges, called the marshals of the field, rode along the barrier, watching for anyone who fell. A fallen knight lost points. Losing your helm meant automatic defeat. Without a helmet, you were not a warrior, but a child. If your horse went down, defeat twice over. But killing a fallen man was forbidden. Any knight who continued to strike a defenseless opponent was banished from tournaments forever. His name was entered into the Black Book, and no one would ever offer him a handshake again. Under the early custom, the vanquished knight had to give his finest horse to the victor. This was humiliating. A war horse was a comrade, known by name and color. Surrendering your horse meant admitting, "I am weaker. I am unworthy of this beast." But what a life-giving rule. It saved thousands of lives, because instead of finishing off a fallen foe, the victor would dismount, take the reins, and help his opponent to his feet. This was called the gift of life, and it was worth more than gold. What's more, the winner would often return the horse on the spot, for a token ransom or simply out of magnanimity. Such gestures were remembered for decades. There were injuries, of course. Broken ribs, shattered teeth, concussions, all commonplace. Sometimes a lance did pierce the armor, if a knight mistakenly brought a war lance instead of a tournament one. Sometimes a horse stumbled and fell onto its rider, and both would die. But tournament fatalities were 10 times lower than in real battles. Historians have calculated that throughout the entire 13th century, about 80 knights died at major tournaments, fewer than the number lost in a single shipwreck. The church initially tried to ban tournaments. Pride, violence, vanity, but quickly realized better to let knights play at killing each other than to fight a full-scale war. So Pope Innocent III, at the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, officially permitted tournaments, on condition they be held no more than twice a year and in the presence of a priest. Part 4. Famous Tournaments and Heroes. History has preserved the names of legendary fighters. William Marshall was an English knight who never lost a single tournament in 40 years. He was called the best knight in the world. He began as a poor younger son without inheritance and ended as regent of England. How did he do it? Through tournaments. He captured rich earls, received ransoms for them, and bought lands and armor. Once, in 1179, at the tournament at Neuilly, he fought for 5 hours straight, changed 3 horses, broke 15 lances, and took 7 knights prisoner. King Henry II, watching from the stand, said, "That is not a knight, that is a devil in iron." And he gave him 1,000 marks. Or the story of Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars. 20 years before he was burned at the stake, he was a star of the tournaments in Champagne. He invented a special grip for the lance, not under the arm, but across the chest, which gave additional striking force. He was called the human battering ram. At the 1291 tournament in Tournai, he unhorsed 3 German knights in a single pass, something never seen before. Unfortunately, nothing remains of his tournament armor. Everything burned with him. And here is a tragic story. In 1240, at the tournament in Neuss near Cologne, 2 own brothers faced each other, Count Ludwig and Count Heinrich von Württemberg. They had quarreled over inheritance. No one knew that they had exchanged armor to deceive the judges. In the heat of combat, Ludwig pierced Heinrich's helmet with his lance, accidentally, but the tip was a war point by mistake. Heinrich fell dead. When Ludwig raised the visor and saw his brother's face, he went mad. He threw down his weapons, entered a monastery, and died of grief a year later. After this incident, mandatory marking of tournament weapons was introduced throughout Europe. A red ribbon on the shaft meant blunted only. And there were curiosities too. In 1287, Venice held a water tournament. Knights in boats with long poles pushed each other into the water. It was a joke by the Doge, but the tradition caught on. True, it quickly died out. Horses drowned. Yet it gave birth to the regatta, boat racing. Part 5. Later Times. From Crowds to Elitism. By the 14th century, tournaments had changed. The mass melee battles, wall against wall, had disappeared. Too chaotic, too dangerous. They were replaced by pas d'armes, from the French passage, crossing. Single combats, where a knight would stand on a bridge or at a castle gate and challenge all comers, one by one. It was like a nightly reality show. Who wants to try my lance? Spectators placed bets. Ladies sighed. Such fights would last for hours. The record belongs to Count Louis II of Flanders. In 1355, he held his ground against 28 opponents in a row, broke 42 lances, and finally fell from his horse from exhaustion, not from a blow. He received a standing ovation. Around the same time, the first tournament codes appeared, written rule books. The most famous is the Book of the Tournament by King René of Anjou, 1460. It specifies everything in detail: how ladies should sit, no crossing their legs, no chewing; how many heralds are required, at least 4; and what punishment awaits a false coat of arms, cutting off a hand, but symbolically, on a parchment drawing. King René even drew colored diagrams of formations. His book is an invaluable source. But in the 15th century, the decline began. Gunpowder and arquebuses made knightly armor useless on real battlefields. Tournaments became too expensive. A single set of tournament armor cost as much as a small estate. And most importantly, the psychology changed. Europe was entering the Renaissance. People had grown tired of medieval harshness. They wanted elegance, dancing, poetry. The tournament seemed a relic. The last great knightly tournament took place in 1559 in Paris, on Rue Saint-Antoine. King Henry II fought against the captain of his guard, Gabriel de Montgomery. The captain's lance accidentally pierced the king's golden helmet. A splinter entered his eye. 10 days later, Henry II died. It was a shock. France declared mourning, and tournaments were banned by royal decree. Symbolically, chivalry killed itself. Epilogue: a living legacy. But the tournaments did not die. They transformed into carousels, equestrian parades, and costume balls. And 400 years later, into modern historical festivals, where people in armor once again shatter lances. Only now, not for ransom, but for pure joy. In England, France, and Germany, there are historical reenactment clubs that hold tournaments each year according to the rules of the 13th century. Spectators weep with happiness when a knight falls from his horse and gets up unharmed. That is how knightly tournaments began. Not as a spectacle for the crowd, not as a ball, not as a fair of vanity,
We move soon.
but as a harsh
Understood.
necessity
Checking my kit.
for those who knew
Crates are
only how to
secure.
fight and
Perimeter
did
is
not
clear.
want to die in
Good.
vain.
Stay sharp.
They came with a sword and found a game. And in that game, honor was born. The very honor that people would try to forget for 800 years, yet could never entirely forget. Because in every man, in every woman, lives the memory of thundering hooves, the crack of a breaking lance, and a lady throwing her handkerchief into the wind. The tournament was a dream that war could be made beautiful, a naive dream. But without it, the world would be far too gray.